tusimame pamoja kulinda uhuru na umoja wetu. Enyi Bwana na binti wa Afrika, mwili wa jua, mwili wa anga, tuifanye Afrika mti wa uzima. Tuungane sote tuimbe pamoja, kuenzi shikamano hatima yetu. Tujitoe wenyewe kupambana pamoja, uhuru na umoja vitawale. Enyi Bwana na binti wa Afrika, mwili wa jua, mwili wa anga, tuifanye Afrika mti wa uzima. Tuungane sote na tujibidishe kutoa kilicho bora kwa Afrika, chimbuko la wanadamu, chemchemi ya utamaduni, tumaini letu wakati wa mafarakano. Enyi Bwana na binti wa Afrika, mwili wa jua, mwili wa anga, tuifanye Afrika mti wa uzima.
It is Humanist TV Africa you are watching. You are watching us live here at Humanist TV Africa. My name is Kato Mukasa, part of Humanist TV Africa, of course, and in the studio is my Kenyan colleague, Hussein Baya, who's going to be doing the production. I want to remind you that Humanist TV Africa is a registered human rights organization. We are a charity media organization registered to do media work, media activism, and of course human rights. As a charity organization, we are doing exactly that. We have studios in Uganda, Kenya, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, UK, and the US. We are growing as an organization. One of our main objectives is to empower people out of poverty, out of ignorance, and of course to tackle stereotypes and to protect the vulnerable people, especially in Africa. Today, we want to tell you more about the Africa that you don't know. The program is Country Profiles. We shall be covering Egypt. But before you go there, I want to encourage you to please subscribe to Humanist TV Africa. Subscribe, share, like, comment, subscribe. We need those numbers. Today, let's talk about Africa, as you see it on my t-shirt, but let's talk about one of those most amazing countries with a history of Africa in its stuff, that is Egypt. Egypt was initially known as Kemet. There were not Arabs there. Egypt's history didn't have Arabs for a long time. So let us talk about the Kemetic Africa you call Egypt. Egypt, the country today, but Egypt, a country with a rich history. Egypt, a country with one of the civilizations of the world. If you talk about 4 world civilization, Egypt is at number 2 of the world civilization. Egypt, after Mesopotamia, gives us the civilization now. Egypt, as we see it today, a country with over 100 million people, one of the populous countries in Africa, a big country, a rich country with petrol, gas, and other natural resources, a country with a legacy of the pyramids, of the Sphinx, and other very, very memorable sites to visit. The country that attracts some of the most numbers of tourists in the world. That country is called Egypt. Let's start to look at the map of Egypt and, of course, the facts about Egypt in a minute. That's the map of Egypt. Today, we are covering country profiles and we're talking about Egypt. Egypt. Egypt is an Arabic nation, a country occupied by Arabs as we speak, and of course, a country with a rich history that goes back in Kemetic Africa. Now, when you look at the map of Egypt, what do you see? What do you see? Red, white, black, and of course, in the center, you see that emblem right there to talk about Egypt. Now, Egypt, the name Egypt comes from the Greek Aegypts. The Greek call it Aegypts, the ultimate form from the Egyptian Hecupta. This was the name of the temple at Memphis. There was a temple at Memphis, temple of Ptah at Memphis, which was used by foreigners to refer to Memphis itself and later on to the country as a whole. It was called Egypt. Now, but when you talk about Egypt, we'll look at ancient Egypt. I want to talk about ancient Egypt today. How was Egypt before the Egypt we see today? It was called Kemet. The name Egypt simply came later on with the invasions. Now, ancient Egypt, we talk about the upper Egypt and the lower Egypt. You talk about the Nile River as one of those most important aspects of Egypt. Don't talk about Egypt without the Nile. The Nile River, Egypt is the home of the Nile River. And of course, we talk about the Red Sea, which gives Egypt a proximity to the rest of the world. We talk about the modern Bay of Libya. Egypt is surrounded by, of course, countries such as Libya. There is, of course, the Red Sea right there. And of course, we know that apart from that, of course, Egypt also has very, very interesting features right there. Now, when you look at this map, what do you see? You are seeing camels, you are seeing some bit of animals, and of course, you are seeing features that set Egypt apart from the rest of the world. Let us continue slowly, Abaya. But before you go there, Abaya, let us be there, right there, no problem. I will explain it here, a brief history. Give me a minute here. I'm going to explain a brief history of Egypt. Now, here is the Kemetic Egypt. I talk about Syria, Palestine, Sinai, Mediterranean Sea. Now, in between there lies Egypt. The Med Sea up there, the Palestinians up there, Sinai, Red Sea. That's why you always see it's always easy for guys to leave Palestine. Today there's a conflict in Palestine, but they are always easier to move from Palestine to Egypt because of the proximity of these two areas. Give me a minute here. I'm going to explain a bit of history of Egypt. Now, in ancient Egypt, before the Egypt we know, we have said that one of the earliest civilizations in the world is the Kemetic civilization. Kemet itself means the land of black soils. Other authors like Diop have said that Kemet meant the land of black people, but I would say Kemet meant also the land of black soils, rich soils. Now, whereas we talk about the Sumerian civilization in history as one of the earliest civilizations of the world in recorded history, the civilization of Mesopotamia, if you heard about Mesopotamia, we talk about Assyrians, Babylonians, and all these guys who came from Mesopotamia. We know for a fact that the second civilization in the world that took it by storm is the Egyptian civilization. I call it the Kemetic civilization. Of course, we know we have the Indus civilization, the Indus Valley civilization, and of course we have the Chinese civilization. But we cannot mention Chinese, we cannot mention the Indus, we cannot mention the Mesopotamians without mentioning the Kemetic civilization of Egypt that gives people in ancient Africa their space in history. We know what they did, the mathematics, the writings, the languages, everything beautiful was being made in Egypt, the pyramids. Now, that is ancient Egypt there. I'm giving it a minute to explain the history of Egypt. Now, early civilization of Egypt is also expressed by tracing it through Kemetic Egypt, as I told you, the land of black soils, the land of black people. Now, ancient Egypt was referred as the homeland of Kemet, and according to Cheikh Anta Diop, Egyptian referred to as a black land of black people, land of black soils, right there. And of course, we talk about Kam and Ham. Ham and Ham to refer to black people in Hebrew tradition. Now, before the black Pharaoh era, there were other eras, there were other inhabitants in Egypt. About 6000 BC, we see the Neolithic culture that took place in the Nile Valley around 6000 BC. Now, during the Neolithic era, several pre-dynastic cultures developed in Egypt, in Upper and Lower Egypt. And then we saw the Badali culture, we saw the success of the Nakada cities, and we saw other cultures coming up in Kemetic Egypt. So Egypt was inhabited by people before actually the Pharaoh era. I've just mentioned to you the Neolithic era there that occupied Egypt, the place where Egypt is today, was occupied by the Kemetic people before. But all these people actually were black people. Now we see the era of the pharaohs when they came, and these were black people, black pharaohs who built Egypt. Don't be told a lie that actually Arabs built the pyramids. Arabs never built the pyramids. Caucasians never built the pyramids. The pyramids were not built by the aliens as they allege. The pyramids were built by black pharaohs, call them kings, and built by willing black people who are being paid to do that work. And because they're building these pyramids to satisfy the kings of the time, because they were more of places of worship, but also places of resting, because kings were regarded as gods as well. We talk about kings like Tutankhamun of Kemet, kings like Matiri and others. Continue with the maps buyer. With the map buyer as I give this history of Egypt. I'm giving the history of Egypt, which you don't hear elsewhere. We see these kings before 341 BC, the kings of Kemet. As I'm going to be showing you their images right there. Archaeology actually has shown that these kings of Kemet, you see them, the pharaohs of Kemet were black people, of course, with black guys who built these pyramids many years ago. Archaeological evidence actually puts the first semi-permanent settlements in the Nile Delta about 40,000 BC, 40,000 years BC. The first hunter-gatherers, the first settlers there who settled in that place actually came from Central Africa, came from East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Chad. These people came from there to come to that place. They were black people. They came from Central Africa. They came from Eastern Africa. They never came from Middle East. The first inhabitants of that area were black people from Central Africa, from Southern Africa, and from Eastern Africa. Over 200,000 years ago. The pyramids themselves, continue by with the photos, the pyramids themselves were among the most important heritages built in Egypt of that time. Now, I'm going to give you some bit of statistics, but before I go into these statistics, I wanted to give you a little more about Egypt and who conquered Egypt. Let us look at Egypt today. But before that, Baya, give me a minute, keep it there. Let me explain before the history of Egypt before, so that our viewers can be able to understand what was in Egypt before the Arabs. And by the way, when did the Arabs come? For example, do you know that the first pyramid of Egypt, the greatest pyramid of Giza, the tomb of Pharaoh Khufu? Very good. Thank you. So go ahead and show those images. We shall go back to the statistics later. The images there are important. Give us the pyramids if you can find them. I want to tell you, viewers, about the greatest pyramid of Giza. Leave a minute there. That pyramid of Giza, built by Pharaoh Khufu in the fourth dynasty in the 26th century BC. It took 27 years to build that pyramid. It took 27 years to build that pyramid, and it was built by Pharaoh Khufu and others. Remember Queen Tiye, between 1398 to 1338 of the 18th dynasty, the wife of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, the mother of Tutankhamun, the grandmother of Tutankhamun, and of course Ankhesementet, and of course she had a court influence there, and how she influenced the building of the pyramids. Remember, that is the Sphinx. The Sphinx, if you may permit me to use that. One of those images we see in Egypt, built by, again, pharaohs. If you look at that suffix, if you look at that image right there, is the photo of a pharaoh, partly a lion, partly a human being. The nose is completely African. The nose, the shape of the head, the lips, the everything there on that suffix there shows you that this guy was a black man. But what has happened? The Arabs actually have changed history. The Arabs have changed history. They claim that everything was built by them. But wait a minute. I will tell you, when did the Arabs actually first settle in Egypt? I'll give you a history. Baya, continue showing us these images slowly, back and forth slowly. I want to give a lesson here on the history of Egypt. For example, let us go into the history, how the things moved in Egypt. We said that the Cushites, of course, invaded Egypt and took over control. The Nubians were in Egypt actually about 2500 BCE, and of course their dynasty was there in Egypt. The Nubian dynasty actually had covered Egypt. If you go into history, around 300 and 3100 BCE, the Cushites invasion there. In the 8th century BC, the Cushites were in Egypt. The Nubians were in Egypt. In fact, the Nubians ruled over Egypt. People don't know that the Nubians, the Cushites, ruled over Egypt. Now, in 7000 BCE, there were settlements in the valley, Nile Valley, the upper kingdom and the lower kingdoms, the lower areas of Egypt were settled in by these people. Of course, and constructions of the pyramids began around 2,500 years ago, BC. 2,500 years BC. The construction of the first pyramids had begun, and were built by black pharaohs, by willing black people who are doing it because they love their kings. Now, in the late period of ancient Egypt, the year was about 332 BC, when Egypt was conquered by the Greeks. The Greeks conquered Egypt about 332 BC. The Greeks conquered it. Remember, we had what they called the Ptolemaic dynasty. If you have heard about Queen Cleopatra and others, that was about 332 BC, and they ruled Egypt for over 300 years until 30 BC. It were the Greeks ruling that beautiful place called Egypt. The Greeks ruled it for over 300 years. After the Greeks, we see the Assyrians coming in. The Assyrians were from Mesopotamia. They conquered and ruled Egypt. The year was 669 BCE. The Assyrians come, conquer, and take over Egypt. Now we see that the Assyrians go, and then we have the Persians' conquest in the year 525 BCE. The Persians now take over from the Assyrians. Now, what happens after the Persians? We see the Macedonian rule there taking place 31st BC century. Then we see Queen Cleopatra there dying, committing suicide after being disappointed by Octavian army, being defeated. Of course, upon the death of Cleopatra, when she died, what happened? And of course, we've seen that, of course, the Romans again took control of Egypt. The Romans took control of Egypt because now the Greeks had lost influence. We see in the year 969, Cairo is established as the capital. There, we see slave trade happening between 1215 to 1517, when we have Mameluke, the slave soldiers there, ruling over and influencing things in Egypt. Later on, we see the Ottoman Empire also taking over. Ottoman Empire taking over in 1517 there, Ottoman Empire taking over. Then we see Napoleonic Wars in 1798. Napoleonic Wars also coming in with their forces and invading Egypt. And then 1801, we see the British also now asserting control. Between 1801, 1805, Ottoman rule there. The British, the Turks are fighting over Egypt. Muhammad Ali, as a commander, established the dynasty there and goes on to reign until 1953. The Muhammad Ali dynasty was right there in Egypt. The Ottoman Empire was actually influential We see the Suez Canal being built there in 1859 to 69. 1859 to 69, the Suez Canal actually is being built in Egypt. Then we see, of course, by then the British had taken control of Egypt effectively from 1882. 1882, British Empire took over Egypt effectively from 1882. The British Empire had taken over Egypt. It became part of their region. And of course, in 1914, Egypt formally became a British protectorate in 1914. Now, from then, Egypt has been under the British until when they got their independence partially in 1922. When Fahd I, King of Egypt, gained independence, it was partial until 1950s when they claimed their autonomy right there from the British. Now, that is the beauty of history of Egypt. And of course, I've seen Egypt with several presidents coming in and going. Some of them have been imprisoned for wrongful doing. There have been coups, there have been uprisings. We remember Anwar Sadat. We remember in 1981 when he was assassinated. We remember the Arab Spring in Egypt. Then we remember recently Mubarak stepping down because of corruption and all the upheavals in Egypt. We remember all these have been happening in Egypt. Today, we talk about also the President Morsi, who was ousted by the Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood, right there, causing a lot of havoc. And of course, today we talk about President Sisi, who won elections in 2018. Now, that is the brief history of Egypt. Let us go back to the statistics. Baya, we go back to the statistics of Egypt. We talk about now, currently, how is Egypt standing? I've taken time to give you a brief history, very fast. Egypt has over 110 million people. 110 million people. One of the most populous countries in Africa, in about number 3, right there, among the most populous countries in Africa. Talk about Nigeria, talk about Ethiopia, talk about Egypt, and the other countries very populous right there in Egypt. Of course, dependence ratio, dependence age is 60%, urban population is 42, and of course, mortality is quite high at 16. Life expectancy in Egypt is 70. Egypt has oil also, as you can see, has oil, lots of oil, by the way. And also Egypt exports a bit of oil, but also to import some bit of oil. Let us go ahead very, very fast with the statistics right there in Egypt. Location, Egypt is located in North Africa, bordering the Mediterranean Sea between Libya and the Gaza Strip. Yes, and the Red Sea in the north of Sudan, and includes the Asian Sinai Peninsula. Total area of Egypt is over 1,450 square kilometers. Egypt is big. And of course, land area is quite bigger, and water area is only 6,000 square kilometers. Egypt has a coastline, and makes it very beautiful with the coastline right there, with over 2,550 kilometers right there. Production of natural gas is quite alive in Egypt. They produce quite a lot of natural gas right there. And also geography shows us where they are located. I told you, in that strip right there, Mediterranean Sea between Libya and the Gaza. And give me other statistics right there, Baya, about Egypt. Egypt is the big history. I had to take time to explain to you Egypt. Give me other images, Baya. In terms of airports, Egypt has 83 airports. Cellular phones are quite many. Almost everyone in Egypt has a phone. Cellular phones, 93 million cellular phones by 2018. Those were quite many. Highways are quite covering 65,000 kilometers of the highway. Internet users are quite many, 39 internet users. Railways cover about 5,000 kilometers. Cell phones, over 7 million. Now, in terms of age distribution, we see that the majority of Egyptians are between 15 to 64 years. And of course, the young ones are 32%. And of course, the elder ones are only 4%. Now, those are the statistics of Egypt. And Egypt is a lovely country. We have seen all these images. Baya, let us move very fast, Baya, to the president of Egypt. Move this images as we rush towards the conclusion. We have talked about Egypt being one of the best sites to visit in the world. The people of Egypt are Arabic, Berbers, Sudanese, and they call themselves Egyptians. We can call them Egyptians, but these are typically African Arabs. These are African Arabs. And as I've told you, they have been in Egypt for a long time. Cairo, one of the most important cities in the world, is called Cairo. Very beautiful city, very, very exciting city. Cairo is a lovely city. I told you that Egypt is one of the economies that have been growing very fast, one of the largest economies in Africa. The country's economy is the largest in Africa by nominal GDP and 38th in the world ranking. By, of course, in 2023, it was number 38 when you rank it in the world. And Egypt was doing very, very well with a very, very big GDP of about 398 US billion dollars in the nominal GDP. And of course, purchasing power parity is also very, very, very impressive of Egypt. Egypt is a destination for tourism. They are earning over 300 million US dollars in tourism, over 300 million US dollars in tourism alone. Now, the president of Egypt, as we talk to them, I told you that is that old man right there who took power in 2018. That has been having large influence right there. But we know that, of course, before him, there was Morsi. There were others who had actually gone the bad way because they've been deposed. Some of them have been assassinated. Some of them have been imprisoned. So now we see the new man there in the helm of Egypt, and we hope that perhaps he may try to stabilize Egypt. But I should tell you that Egypt has been going under turmoil. Opposition, so many protests, so many instabilities, lots of street protests in Egypt right there. Sometimes people are on the streets to complain that the government is actually misleading them. So in terms of politics, Egypt hasn't been well managed in the recent times, though in terms of exports, it remains one of the leading oil exporters in the world, and the economy is bigger. Egypt today, we say, is among the middle income economies, though statistically they are putting it among the lower middle income economies. But one of the best economies in Africa, we can say, is Egypt. President Sisi there won the election in March. It was March 2018. He won the general election there. But of course, people have been saying that he rigged that election because the opposition was not given a better chance to compete against President Sisi right there on your screen. And of course, we see that in October 2018, 7 people were sentenced to death over the 2016-2017 wave of Islamic State group attacks on churches. There have been attacks on churches in Egypt, and some people have been actually imprisoned. Others have been given life imprisonment. Now, how is it to be a Christian in Egypt? How is it to be an unbeliever in Egypt? It's challenging because Egypt is purely Islamic State. Egypt is purely Islamic State. And the bad thing, that also had so many attacks from extreme Muslims right there. So Mohamed Morsi narrowly won presidential election in 2012. And of course, we saw the army overthrowing him. Today we'll talk about Sisi there. Thank you so much for watching. It has been nice having you today. We are talking about Egypt, the country of wonders. Egypt, the country we know as Kemet. We know it as Kemet. Talk about civilization in Africa, real civilization. You can trace it in Kemetic Egypt. Best universities of the world, writing system, a Shadoof method of drawing water, the pyramids, the science behind the pyramids, the way of teaching people. The first educators in the world mainly were in Kemetic Egypt. The best scientists of the world were in Kemetic Egypt. So Egypt has a rich history. We go there because we want to learn from the best history of Africa. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one.